So a lot of people told me about that too, but it was sort of through a personal experience, actually. Actually, 7 years ago from this very day, October 10th, one of the subjects in my last documentary film died. He was a obscure French paper artist who worked outside of Paris and had lived in poverty his entire life and worked in obscurity, obsessed with the ideas in his head. And just as he was really on the cusp of, I think, getting some of the recognition that he absolutely deserved, he got lung cancer. He was 53 years old when he died. And I knew he was going to die. I actually went to visit him a few months before he died. But what I didn't anticipate happening, and what happened instantly, like the moment I got the phone call that he had passed away, was this deeper sort of sense of panic about the voice of an artist sort of being cut short, and the idea of their work. And if you saw his workshop, which was basically his kitchen table when he died, there were pieces of work that he had only half finished, and no one in the world, even if they had directions, could have ever figured out how to finish them. And so you get this real visceral sense of the loss of a voice and a way of interpreting the world, and for that to be forgotten sort of terrified me. And so the first thing that I did was I wrote to about 20 newspapers around the world, mostly English language in the United States, the big cities, and London and Australia, and obviously in France. And the only newspaper that contacted me was the New York Times, which I thought was like the least likely one to do so. And it was Marguerite Fox, who you now have got to know a little bit, who called me. And we spent about half a day on the phone. And because I had only known him as an adult and in the final years of his creative life, I knew very little about his personal life. And obviously a lot of her questions were about, his early life and what he studied, and I was not able to get the answers to those questions in the time that I had to do it. And there were conflicting reports as to what he had studied in college, and there were rumors that he had been married at some point, but we couldn't really sort that out in time. And it just was this powerful moment of recognition of how quickly the details of any life start to slip away, and you can apply that to history as well. And that really shocked me. And so and throughout this whole time, I started sort of looking, after the Times called me, I started looking at the obituary page and saw that like 8 out of 10 of the obits that they were running were fascinating stories of people who were utterly worthy of our attention, but who we hadn't heard of before. And it became clear to me that the obits were this sort of, contemporary anthropology almost of the culture that we're just kind of evolving out of. And that just, as a documentarian, fascinated me. And that's when I sort of got the idea that you were saying, that like these people are doing in a completely different format and scale, much like what documentary filmmakers are doing in their own work. And so through that kinship, I sort of sensed something, and then I called the New York Times.
And you have a theme running all the way through this, too, that sounds very much like what a documentary filmmaker would think of as they look at these people. While it was fascinating to read about how they put stylistically together their obituaries, we were really looking at biographies of all of these men and Mark Gurley, right? I mean, you really felt like you were getting to know them and who they were as you watched them prepare these goodbyes to public figures.
Yeah, I mean, they became really, like, I got a real affection for all of them over time, and seeing the dedication and the loyalty that they, and just the quiet duty that they brought to their daily work, like on an everyday basis.
Have you ever worked at a newspaper?
No.
No experience at a newspaper? Anybody on your team?
No.
Because you would think you would. One of the things as an old newspaper hack that I took away from it was the many pauses you had I was dying with him as he was trying to write a lead for Wilson. Because every time he got up to get a cup of coffee, he didn't want a cup of coffee. He didn't know what the freaking lead was. And you seem to capture that so perfectly in just the pauses.
That was the stuff that was sort of most fascinating to me, was those quiet moments. And you could talk to other filmmakers who sort of view the work musically or sort of in terms of tempo, and those cerebral moments were both like a window into their process and to their the challenges that they face, but they also sort of serviced us structurally in the film, and so those sort of popped out in a lot of ways. But I should really give credit to the team for being so natural with the camera crew there. It was not easy when you're working under that much pressure, and there's confidential issues and all sorts of sensitivities and uncertainties as to how your day is going to evolve, and something crystal clear due just a few hours away. They really rose to the occasion.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating to see how perfectly you captured what it's like to be writing a demo, and especially something like that, which is pretty sensitive, and you don't want to make mistakes, even if you're going to. Did you have the sense as you were doing it that you were really yourself writing a piece of history? Newspapers don't have obituary staffs anymore. Most don't have morgues anymore. The Boston Globe has just sold its plant down in Dorchester and moved to a high-rise office building, and it gave its morgue to Northeastern University. So there's no morgue, and I can't even imagine what it's like to be a reporter there now, and where do you go to get those crumbling pieces of paper that tell you who somebody was?
That's interesting about the Globe. I didn't know that. I mean, while we were working on the film, the LA Times laid off their entire obituary staff, and I think one of the two of the Chicago and I think Philadelphia papers downsized. Same thing with the Washington Post, although they seem to be still sort of devoting some resources to it. But there was this ambient sense, like, of urgency a little bit, like, yeah, there was a sense of the fragility, I think, of the institution of journalism, but you don't step back in a way to ever contextualize it in the sense of history. And it's funny that you asked me that. No one's asked me that before, and it's a question that I asked all the writers, naturally, you know. And they too said sort of the same thing, that you can't be on like a meta and a micro level at the same time. And so you're sort of guided by an intuition about something that you think is important, and then you devote yourself to the details and really avoid thinking beyond that.
What do you think will be lost to us as a culture if we stop having these little mini 800-word biographies of the last man in Manhattan to fix a typewriter?
Yeah. You know, I've thought about this a lot, and I've never felt like I could take sort of like an academic position, but something, I think they won't end. I think we'll still, it's going to be a struggle, because obviously it's against the forces of Twitter and of a sense of brevity. I mean, ironically, obituaries are already like the most abbreviated thing you can possibly imagine. It's condensing 80, 90, 100 years into 800 words. And so that's already kind of radical in its brevity. But I think Bruce Weber, often when he's traveled with me and addressed audiences, has said that obituaries are not for the dead, but for the living. And I think that there's a lot of truth in that. And I think if you look back over the past centuries, and probably millennia, people have always found a way to, through written language and pictures, remember the people that matter to them. And so whether it comes in the corner of a daily newspaper or something else, although I do think the editorial or journalistic obituaries are so important and valued by people. Like, maybe they'll only be on the web going forward, or who knows what the future holds. But I think they're too ingrained in the human psyche and in our culture and our cultural needs to sort of disappear.
They just disappear. And that they sort of, they give life to the notion that most journalists carry around, which is that everyone is an interesting story.
Absolutely.
All you have to do is scratch deep enough beneath the surface, right? And you will find the ones that you featured that were the most fascinating to me, at least, were the ones that were the least famous.
Exactly. And I mean, this is a whole nother story, and I can talk more about it if someone asks, but we really wanted to make the film about mostly unknown people. I mean, the Michael Jacksons and other people are definitely in there, and for very good reason, but what I think consistently brings people back with renewed curiosity every day is the stuff that they learn about that they didn't even know that they didn't know about. And that was one of the most, the biggest gifts of doing this project. I mean, in my research, I read probably thousands of New York Times obituaries just to acquaint myself with the writers and the bylines and what had been written about over the past 20 or 30 years, and the number of unbelievably wonderful stories that I had the privilege of reading that didn't make it into the film. I mean, there's just so much there, and it's so quickly forgotten.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be fascinated to see if Melody Miller ever makes it into a New York Times obituary. She was the wife of Mr. Wilson, who was the Kennedy aide. Melody herself worked for JFK and Bobby Kennedy and Teddy until his death. And I was taken aback when I first saw the film you could almost hear her voice in the back. And he was on the phone with her for quite a long time, which is everybody's experience who's ever interviewed Melody Miller. So I think she definitely deserves, not for many, many years, a New York Times obituary of her own. I would love to open it up to you because you'll have much more fascinating questions than I will. And it's just such a wonderful film.
Thank you, Eileen.